the craft of intelligence, I think, is important to this issue of truth because it takes account of that uncertainty and it puts a way for you to deal with it. I think information disorder is the greatest threat we face.
The fact of the matter is that there are stories, success stories, that we're just not going to hear about. And I hate to be a tease about that, but it's just the reality of intelligence and its history. The original title for this panel was Hidden Successes, Buried Failures. Well, there are successes that are hidden for a very good reason. There are stories that in their entirety cannot be told except in the broadest of terms. The most sensitive project I ever worked on involved my going to another facility that was a cover facility, doing a surveillance detection routine on the way, which is unusual for a historian in his work, to review files on a particular program that had been going on for 10 years, so long that the current operators wanted to know how it started and how it went. And this was, I can say, going right up to the line, this was a human intelligence operation with a technical side that provided high-level, very critical intelligence on a hard target. Researchers and journalists and people who go into intelligence studies hate the phrase sources and methods, but it's a reality. I have no doubt that if this particular operation became known, that the principal agent would die. Yeah, people will die. The methods, which are still being used, would dry up. So we just have to get used to the idea that there are successes that simply cannot be talked about. Now, I do believe in eventual declassification, but this is something that in my lifetime, I'm not going to see.
If analysts are really doing their job, they're really getting policymakers to understand how their opponents think, policymakers will naturally take actions that are preventative and preemptive. And so something doesn't happen, and that's the success. So all source analysis is what CIA analysts do, at least after 1952, where if it's related to your topic, it's included. So sometimes students ask me, what's the best int? And this question is just a Zen cone because it's like asking a parent to choose their favorite child. That's just not the way that you do it. The best int is the one that gives you the piece of this puzzle. It's like saying which is the most important piece of a jigsaw puzzle.
I think too often Hollywood places the espionage shows in the action genre, action films. And the problem is then, of course, we end up with films that are about, assassinations and car chases and rogue agents. Everything has a rogue agent, as you know. But we should be able to explore the high stakes of life and death issues in a character-based sense with sort of real stories behind them. So I think, this is a place where Hollywood writers who really want to do good work should be trying to do sort of accurate and real type of stories because, what stories in espionage are about the human factor, about betrayal, trust, flawed individuals and pressure-packed situations, these type of things, character-based stories.
I found actually that satire and fiction was a great way for me to deal with a lot of this reality and to bring a lot of these truths to the general audience. And I think one of the other things we've all discussed as well, that one of the reasons I think that's important is because we do live in a democratic system where we do need transparency. We do need to understand that the general American public needs to understand what its intelligence agencies are doing and needs to have a realistic view and understanding of that. But I also think it's important for people inside the agencies, inside the CIA, for example, not to believe their own legend.
We have to guard against the cult of secrecy. And now I look over the years, the role of secrecy, both in our societies and with the dangers of an organization like ours becoming us becoming a surveillance state. We have to, in a sense, renew our contract, our social contract as an organization with the American people, even more today than we ever have. We can't have a cult of secrecy. We have to have necessary secrecy, but it's something that I got to the point in my own career where I protected my cover to a point where the only people who didn't know I was a CIA officer, in other words, the world's intelligence services and bad guys all knew, but my own friends and family didn't know. And I thought, okay, I got to correct this. The agency was tiny when I joined. Yeah, you were just talking breathtakingly about the digital age and everything that comes with it. It introduces an element of complexity that it didn't seem we faced in the early years. They were kind of nice years, golden age of espionage, the Cold War with the Soviets. Everything seemed to have a right to Sue's point. 99 out of 100 analysts seemed to be working Russia-related stuff. It was very soothing, right? We all kind of thought we knew what we were doing. In a way, that world was already transitioning, though. The Soviet Union collapsed less than 10 years after I joined the agency, and we weren't ready for it. And we weren't ready to explain to policymakers, a lot of those were the Clinton years, as to what was our value added anymore with all that. So we spent a good part of the 90s questioning our own existence and value added. But as we got bigger and bigger and bigger, we had a difficulty getting the same kind of workforce. I think Sue's comments, we talked a little bit during the break about the struggle to get the right balance of expertise. Do you need the expert? Well, so many of the issues you do, some of these technical issues. You have people doing computer ops. You got people doing now cyber and counterintelligence work that are no longer humaniters. They're doing the technical sides of counterintelligence. We need all these expertise, but we also need people with a big perspective. We need generalists still. In a way, we almost only had, except for on the science and technology side and the analytical side, and certainly had expertise. So I'd stress that. And it's impossible to discount how the problem of scale affected our culture, the way we thought and operated, while the world was also scaling up.
There were very few women, but there were women that mattered. And there were women, more men of color than women of color, but women and men of color that mattered. And so what is interesting is there weren't a lot, but there were seminal figures that mattered. There was Tish Vida in the National Reconnaissance Office. There was Sandra Cruzman in analysis. There was Bonnie Hirschberg, who was in leadership analysis, who I credit with bringing the notion that women could learn from each other to the forefront. There was my first division chief when I was a deputy division chief, an African American man. I think Jim was the only leader in that whole office of color. And I will never forget, he let me do whatever I could do. We all have bosses that want to make you small so that they look big. He wanted me to be everything. And one day I said, Jim, why are you letting me do all this? I'm just average. He said, Sue, I just want you to always remember that averages are the prerogative of the majority. I never get to feel average. And that shaped me. So I think even though our numbers are much bigger, in even the early days, there were people and diversity made a difference. It was small diversity, but it made a difference. And then we've come along, as I mentioned in my remarks this morning. I think what happened, and the coolest thing that happened, is the numbers got greater, and maybe some on the backs of the class action suit, maybe some on the backs of the Madeleine Albright study. The numbers of women and minorities in leadership position just started to grow so you could see it more. And the coolest thing happened. We figured out that excellence doesn't have one look.
In terms of success and failure in reducing uncertainty, in terms of our success and failure in adapting to new threats and adapting to new environments, I really think it comes down to three things that have really nothing to do with how we're organized or whether we have DNI or not or any of that. I think it comes down to having the best people, having the best leadership, and having the resources you need to do the job. That's it. John Brennan had me in for dinner before he announced his reorganization of the agency into a kind of Goldwater's Nichols world, with directors that supplied the talent and mission centers that, looked like combatant commands and carried out the missions of the agency. And he walked me through it and he said, what do you think? And I said, John, I got to tell you, there are upsides and downsides to every organizational concept that you can possibly think of. And I don't think an organizational concept is a necessary, particular organizational concept is a necessary condition for success. I think our success depends entirely on the quality of our people and the quality of our leadership. Period. End of story.